All right, we are live. All right. Yes, very happy to have Randy Bean as my guest today on the Ravit Show. Randy Bean is the founder and CEO of New Vantage Partners. He's also the contributor at Forbes, MIT Sloan Review, Harvard Business Review, and the Wall Street Journal. So today we'll be talking a lot around his journey, about his book, Fail Fast and Learn Faster. You might have seen me talking a lot about it, but today we'll learn more about it from obviously Randy himself. Without wasting any more time, let's have Randy here. Hey, Randy, welcome to the Ravit Show.
Hi,
How are you?
Ravit. I'm great. It's a pleasure being with you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We have Kate already here. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Kate. Nice to
Matthew's
meet
here.
you.
So, since obviously your book "Fail Fast, Learn Faster" is talk of the town already, Randy, we would want to talk a lot about it. But why not start with introducing yourself first?
Sure. So I'm Randy Bean, founder and CEO of New Vantage Partners.
Yeah.
It's a boutique management consulting firm founded in 2001. So this is actually its 20th year in business. We serve as strategic advisors to Fortune 1000 companies around helping them leverage data as an asset, helping them become data-driven, help them develop a data culture, and help them innovate with data in their business. So as mentioned, we've been doing this for 20 years. Work with and have worked with most of the major banks, insurance companies, asset management firms in the US and globally, as well as leading life sciences and pharmaceuticals, healthcare companies. And as you mentioned, Ravit, I have published roughly 150 articles. You know, I mentioned that number, and I know you quoted 150, so I actually counted them up just to see if that was correct, because I was guessing.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
what I found was that I'd published 25 Wall Street Journal columns. That was all in 2014,
Wow.
2015. Since then, I've published 88 columns in Forbes, 11 pieces in Harvard Business Review, and 16 in MIT Sloan Review, and then 15 in various other publications. So when you total those up, they come to 155. So I guess it was a good guess.
Oh,
And,
yes.
and then lastly, over the years, have been asked whether I was interested in writing a book, and I had said no, because it would really be a distraction from the management consulting activities. But what with the pandemic and having some time and not wanting to go through another long and dark winter, I decided to write this book, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data, and AI. And as you can tell, there's a lot packed into that title.
Yeah, definitely. I think one book which, obviously with the title itself, I was so curious to learn more about it. The first time, obviously, I saw the book when Kate promoted it back then, and now I always wanted to learn more about it, and I got the opportunity. I'm so happy about it. But moving forward, obviously, Randy, I would want to know a little about your early days into data. So what was that one thing that the first time when you felt very much intrigued about getting into the data world, and you felt that this is actually the new like obviously one of the Forbes articles said that data science is the sexiest job, but still, what was your first that first hit when you felt that okay, data is the new oil?
Yeah, well, there's a story here that I've told before. So I'm, in the scheme of things, I'm old now. So I've been at this for over a generation. So when I was in school, I didn't study computer science. I didn't study technology. I actually studied English and history and art history and things of that kind. And that's why I write, by the way. It's a good opportunity to combine those skills with what's happening in the world today. But I was pretty pragmatic, so I decided I was going to go into industry, and I was hired by a major bank. At the time, it was Bank of Boston, which is now part of Bank America. Was the oldest bank in the United States, founded in 1784. And they had two types of jobs. One was commercial loan officers. The others were technologists. And I was hired into the technology side of the organization, and they taught me to be, if you can believe it, a COBOL programmer. And I wasn't really interested in the programming, but I was
Yeah.
interested in, I looked and they had all this data and I said, wow, this is really interesting. And I said to the people in charge, I said, so what do you do with this data? And they said, oh, the regulators make us hold on to it for 7 years and then we're allowed to destroy it. And I thought like, oh my God, here you have all of this information that you can analyze and mine to understand your customers, understand their buying behaviors, their preferences, how to interact with them better. And the mindset was, we're going to take this data, lock it in the vault, and as soon as we can, we're going to incinerate it. So, from the get-go, I was interested in data. After spending 8 years at the bank, both in technology and then in strategic planning, and strategic planning was really using the data to define the markets and the customer segments that the bank wanted to focus on. I went to work for a company who was one of the early leaders in what was known as database marketing, which is now known as CRM. That was a company called Hart Hanks. Within a couple of years, I came to lead their financial services database marketing practice in North America. So in that context, worked with most of the major banks, asset management companies, and insurance companies, helping them understand the totality of their customer relationships and using data to, in the parlance, get, keep, and grow those customer relationships.
Yeah, I think that is one inspiring journey when you started off. Okay, we have Randy, a few people who have joined in. We'll just read them. Daksh is here. Manisha is here. Matthew had an important question. Definitely, my toddler is very risk averse. How do I best teach him taking risks and failing is okay? What do you
Yeah,
say?
I mean, so fail fast, learn faster is basically a metaphor for growing through trying things, and it has direct analogs in the world of data and analytics. So test and learn. Think of test and learn from the analytics example, but in life and business, if you don't try things, if you don't take a step forward, you can't possibly succeed and you can't possibly progress. And the book title is from a quote from the Irish playwright Samuel Beckett, who wrote Waiting for Godot, for those of you who have a literary interest. But he said, basically, fail fast. I'll talk a little bit more about the exact quote, but the idea was that you learn from experience.
Yes, definitely. Awesome. There was another question, since we were talking about 150 articles. 150 plus articles is a huge accomplishment. Can you tell us a little about your journey? And I can also share your Forbes page. So yeah, Randy, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah. So as mentioned, I like to write, but did it just periodically. But in 2014, when big data all of a sudden came into vogue, I got a call from the Wall Street Journal. They knew of the advisory and consulting work I was doing and some of the speaking I was doing, and asked if I would be interested in writing a monthly column on big data for the Wall Street Journal, which I agreed to do. So 2014, 2015, wrote once a month for the Wall Street Journal. And then, as these things go, at the end of 2015, they said, well, I guess big data is done and over with. So what's the next big thing? And I said, well, actually, this is going to be with us for many years, decades. And at that point, I started writing for Forbes, carrying that column forward.
Yeah, I think, yes, definitely. And Forbes, I have seen the articles. Here it is. I really love them. I think the knowledge that you're sharing in terms of the big data and the failure of big data. I see an article as well here. And so, which is, Randy, if I ask you, I know it's a difficult question. If I ask you, which is your favorite article out of them, or maybe the top 3 articles that you might rate out of them?
Yeah, well, one comes to mind because I wrote it fairly recently, and that's called The Failure of Big Data, and failure is in quotes. And what the theme of the article is some of the articles are industry case studies about what a particular company is doing right now. But this is kind of a long-term perspective looking over the course of the past 10 years, and some of the initial prognostications in terms of big data was going to change everything and it was going to do it immediately. So the reality is it didn't do it immediately, But over time, it's having an even greater impact than was even imagined. It's kind of like for those who lived through the early years of the internet, there was this breathless enthusiasm that the internet was going to change everything.
Exactly.
And it didn't happen overnight, but over time, it actually happened to a much greater degree. So that was really the theme of that article. When I said the failure of big data, why it was in quotes is because it really hasn't been a failure. It's just taken longer in many respects than people expected. The other articles that interest me are the articles that I write about culture. That's really my beat or my focus, if you will. The cultural obstacles to companies becoming data-driven or developing data cultures. You know, these are large legacy companies. Some of them have been in existence generations or over 100 years. They don't change overnight. These are complex organizations. Sometimes I run into people on the street or in a bar and they say, "What do you do?" And I try to translate it into terms they can understand. Sometimes they say, "I do Moneyball for business." I describe how I go in and advise Fortune 1000 companies on how they can become more data driven. And then often the people say to me, "Oh, so you go in there and then you fix them up and then they're all right away." And I said, "Yeah, you know, that's not really how it works in the real world. You know, these are large organizations, been around for a long time. And if you can move them in increments, that's actually meaningful progress. You just don't completely transform these organizations overnight." You know, I have a story about 5 or 6 years ago, I walked into a top 10 insurance company and they had the president of the consumer insurance line. And he said to me, "You know, the reason I brought you in here is we'd like to make our company data driven. And, you know, I'd like to be able to do this within 60 days. Do you think we can help?"
Oh my goodness.
And I just thought, yeah, you know, maybe we should have this conversation again when you have a more realistic time frame and sense of what it takes.
Yeah, exactly. I think definitely it's not about, I think, uh, as as I can see, you know, data is not something which can be realized or can be studied just in a short period of time. It needs that much of a ground where you can play around, you can understand what the company is getting into and what they are actually expecting out of you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I like to tell organizations that not only is it a journey, but it's not a place that you get to a destination. You're never done. You always need to reinvent yourself, improve yourself. The volumes of data are proliferating, the sources of data are proliferating. And when I talk to organizations, when I go into organizations and they say, "We have it all figured out," I really worry about them. The very best organizations that I deal with historically, Capital One, American Express, those are organizations that are always looking over their shoulder and never comfortable, never feel that they're doing well enough, are always looking at new ways of doing things, always wondering what Amazon or Google or Facebook or digitally native companies are doing. So those companies that are perpetually restless tend to be the ones that succeed in the long term, and the companies that say, you know, "Hey, we've got it all figured out." I worry about those.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I think that really is very interesting. And also, I saw someone interesting coming in. The data whisperer, Scott Taylor, is here. Hey, Scott, thanks for joining. But uh, talking about, you know, articles, obviously, I had one question for you, Randy. So, what's the, you know, obviously, when we talk about you writing for Forbes, for Harvard, what's the you know, the biggest challenge that you see when you start writing an article, because it is ever evolving? What do you make, you know, how do you keep it very much a evergreen article? Because when you write about the biggest failure in data, big data, how obviously you have made it very evergreen article. When I read it, it just looks like it is being published yesterday. So how does that happen?
I'm going to answer that two ways. So first, I'm going to say that when I write an article, because people have asked me about this, they said, "Oh, does it take you weeks and weeks to write an article?" And I say, "No, it takes 1 hour." And what I mean by that is I think I conceive a topic and I think about a topic, but, you know, I have a consulting business and other things that I'm doing. So I basically put on my calendar 1 hour and I basically dump out everything that I need to
Exactly.
say. And I put it in a drawer and I take it out about a day or two later and I reorder some sentences and then I just basically press go. But the thing that's interesting about the articles is that each organization's at a different stage of maturity. So there's stories or articles that I wrote 5 or 6 years ago that a particular organization will pick it up now and say that's directly relevant to where we are today. So in some respects, things change, but they don't change that much. So, when I first entered the field, people were saying, we need to look at our data. We need to gain insights from our data. That's what they're saying today. That's what they'll be saying 20 years from now. So technologies evolve, data sources proliferate, as mentioned. Some of the stories continue to be relevant, but you need to continue to refresh based upon the latest technologies, the latest data capabilities, what's happening in the industry. Certainly with the COVID epidemic of 2020, 2021, that really elevated the awareness of data. All of a sudden, people that never cared about data were looking at COVID dashboards and trying to figure out what it meant for them. And there was various data from, there was Cambridge University, University of Washington, data from all around the world. And people said, well, what does this data mean? How do I reconcile it? So, there's just so much that's happening and so much that's evolving in the data field that on the one hand, you want to stay on top of it and provide fresh insights. On the other hand, because each organization's at a different level of maturity, what one organization was embarking on a few years ago is applicable to another organization in terms of their journey today.
Yeah, I think totally I agree with that. So talking about, obviously articles, that also brings me to an important topic of the hour, which is your, obviously, the upcoming book, Fail Fast, Learn Faster: Lessons in Data Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data and AI. So first things first, obviously, I would want to know, how did you come up with the title? Obviously, I know it's something which you've just brought up from the Greek, but still, how did this, why just Fail Fast, Learn Faster as a title?
Okay, well, I put together a few slides that now might be a good opportunity to show those, because I actually answer that question in the slides.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. So here we go.
Okay. So can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, if not, I'll just,
There we go. Okay, so just kind of going through this. So there's me, a nice press photo. I actually have a neighbor that's a global fashion photographer, and he's actually done all those photographs of the Spice Girls and various international models. And when I decided to do the book, I said, hey, why don't you create one of those photos for me? So there it is. So moving to the next page. So why did I write this book? I mentioned that I studied English literature, and I actually, in my spare time, I'm the co-chair of one of the preeminent writers in residence programs in the world. Last year, one of our writers actually won the Nobel Prize in literature. So part of me always aspired to write, the next Moby Dick or the Great Gatsby. But, they say write about what you know. And I had a front seat to the information revolution. There's a lot of stories I can tell over the past 35 years. I'll just digress for a moment. One of those stories is, when I was working for Hart Hanks and helping companies with database marketing, I got a call one day, and it was from Microsoft. And they said to me, and I'm in Boston, they're in Redmond, Washington. They said, we're interested in understanding more about our customers and the data that we have on our customers, and we'd potentially like to do some business. And I said, okay, that's great. And they said, well, can you fly out this afternoon? And, I had a young child at the time, and I just fly out this afternoon. Ordinarily, I would have said no, but then again, it was Microsoft. And I said, sure, I'll do it. Exactly. So I flew from Boston to Redmond, Washington, and I walked into a room, and the person that was sitting on the other side of the table was Steve Ballmer. For those of you who Steve Ballmer, president, who became president of Microsoft and
Exactly.
now owns the Los Angeles Clippers, the basketball team. And he's a very exuberant guy. And he said, data is too impossible to delegate. He's like, I want to be in charge of this and want to know exactly what we're doing. So he became the client. They hired us, and he was a phenomenal client and phenomenal to work with. So it's some of those type of experiences. And being a management consultant, or worked with a range of organizations, Federal Express, a very innovative company under Fred Smith. And then in the internet era from 1998 to 2001, I did 2 venture-backed startups in Silicon Valley, and one of them was funded by Kleiner Perkins. So that was really the heyday of the internet, and to be doing a Kleiner Perkins company was tremendously exciting. So all of that fed into the background and experience and some of the stories that I tell in the book. As mentioned, in 2014, started writing on the topic for the Wall Street Journal, and I've continued it at Forbes and in HBR and MIT. And it seemed to me that the timing was right. Now more than ever, particularly with the COVID epidemic, it heightened and increased the sense of importance of data. So now is really the data moment, that moment of urgency. And for those who don't recognize it, that's Thomas Edison with a light bulb. So that's why I wrote this book and why I wrote this book now. In terms of my goals in writing the book, on the next slide, there you go. I wanted to write a history of the information age. In other words, I knew from experience that it's been a generation since people have been working with data and trying to organize their data. And this really is the age of big data. So I want to talk about that.
Right.
I also want to make the book accessible to general readers. So not only experts in the field, but people, the person on the street, if you will, who is trying to understand what all the fuss is about and why they should care. I also want to make the book entertaining and informative. I didn't want to make it dry and just for specialists only. I wanted to avoid jargon as much as possible and to translate everything into terms that anyone could understand. And in all of my writing from the get-go with the Wall Street Journal, I viewed my ultimate audience as the CEO, a Fortune 1000 CEO and the board, people that didn't understand all the particulars about MDM and various types of analytic models. Rather, they cared about what was the business value, how could it help them grow their organization, how could they serve their customers better. So I really wanted to speak in plain language that was understandable to anyone. At the same time, I wanted to make the book provocative. I just didn't want to give the easy answers. I wanted to challenge people and to force them to think. And I also wanted to make the book a manifesto for action. And the illustration here is from the Edvard Munch painting, The Scream. And so this book is really intended as a call for action. If you're not data-driven, you should be data-driven. If you don't care about data, you should care about data. If you think you're doing well, then you should think about doing better. So all of those things. And in the course of it, I tried to tell a story and provide anecdotes and examples. I have a lot of anecdotal experience. You know, when I go into meetings, I tend to remember the stories, the little nuances of things. And so I tried to relate as many of these as possible, and also add case studies for the experts. So so it wouldn't just be all style. You know, I always think about, you know, what are the critics going to say? So on the one hand, I was thinking if I write it one way, they'll say it's all style and no substance. And if I write it another way, it's all substance and no style. So at the highest level, I tried to tell a story and do it in a thematic fashion. But I provide roughly 25 or more case studies from leading companies, so practitioners can dig really deep and understand what companies did, why they were successful, and have those examples. And then lessons for business leaders, what are the takeaways, what they can learn, how this is understandable in language that they understand, and also how to do this right and how to avoid the pitfalls so others can basically get there faster.
Yeah.
Moving to the next slide. What's the book about? The Big Data Revolution. There's a nice visual that's puts together big data and revolution. So there's like the power fist with big data. And I just want to read from you briefly. This is the opening paragraph of the book, and it really addresses the question of why should anyone care. So it says, the world is in a race to become data-driven, now more than ever. The warp speed effort to organize scientific and epidemiological data from across the globe in a heroic effort to find a COVID-19 vaccine has illustrated the urgency and existential nature of this quest. We need data, science, facts, knowledge, and insight to make informed, wise, and critical decisions. Now more than ever, data matters, and having good data matters tremendously.
I love it. It
So-
is, yeah.
So hopefully that sounds like a thriller. So, now you'll want to dig deeper and see what all the fuss is about and understand what's going on.
Yeah, definitely.
So another thing is, I wanted to combine the good, the bad, and the ugly as I describe it. Here's another revolutionary picture. This is the French painter Delacroix, a painting from the French Revolution. So I continue to maintain this theme about big data and information being revolutionary. But here's several quotes I have from the book, because as mentioned, I intended the book to be provocative. Yeah. So in addition to all the great studies about how companies tried things and were really successful, I have some horror stories in there too. So one critic said, wow, this book is terrifying. So I'm going to start off with this first quote and read it. We had all of the data, we just didn't connect the dots. Well, that's actually from the 9/11 Commission after the 2001 World Trade Center attack. The point was that all these government agencies had collected this data, but they didn't share it. So that's pretty poignant. We'll make our decisions guided by expertise, data, and science. Actually, that's from New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who these days they're saying he didn't follow all of the data and science necessarily, but at the time when he was at his peak of his popularity, he said, data is going to guide us through the epidemic. There's some other quotes about data will create winners and losers. And then there's some other provocative quotes. I'll just read two of these.
Yeah.
In the future, will data help physicians cure diseases or help health insurers deny claims, make factories and products safer, or accelerate layoffs, ultimately spawn some kind of hostile artificial intelligence? So again, these quotes are meant to make you think, and not only about the many, many benefits of data, but also how data can be misused if in the wrong hands. And I love this next quote that I incorporated from an article that was written in the Washington Post. And it says, so this is a critical perspective, and I quote authors like Cathy O'Neill, who I've interviewed, who wrote The Weapons of Math Destruction, who have a very negative view of algorithms. But here's another critic, and says, big data is the big bad of our moment. Companies and governments amass enormous troves of information about our online and offline activities, so they can understand them better than we do. Creepy firms like Cambridge Analytica mine big data from websites such as Facebook. Facebook itself seems increasingly creepy, grounded in lying to the public about what happens to the data it collects. So a lot of food for thought here, both good as well as cautionary. I like this quote too. This is actually somebody said to me in a bar when I was describing what I did. They said, so if there's all of this new data, how come it doesn't look like anyone is getting any smarter?
It's a funny but intelligent question there, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some of those type of things in the book.
Yeah.
And maybe I could talk a little bit more about who I wrote the book for.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the people in those pictures there, by the way. they look scary as well as horrified. So I really wrote for three audiences, as mentioned previously. One was CEOs, senior executives, corporate decision makers, really trying to understand what data meant to them from a business perspective and a practical perspective. And then industry professionals, practitioners, workers, students, those who want to learn from experience, see what other organizations are doing and see how they can benefit from that. And then general readers, and that is people that have no background in data, have previously had no interest in data, and this is intended to help them understand not only what all the fuss is about, but why it's relevant to them, why it matters, and that if you ignore data, you do it at your own peril. You asked the question, and now I'm going to answer it. Why did you? How did you decide on the title? So that's on the next slide.
Exactly.
And I was looking for something bold and provocative, consistent with the theme of the book. Something about learning from experience. Something along the line of nothing ventured, nothing gained, live and learn, trial and error, test and learn. And the first time I saw this quote, it wasn't from reading deep literature of Samuel Beckett. I was watching the Australian Open tennis match about 7 years ago, and the Swiss tennis player who won that year, Stan Wawrinka, had tattooed on his arm, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And I thought, wow, what a marvelous quote for an athlete or anybody trying to do better. And I thought to myself, like, did he just think that up or what? And so I typed the quote into Google, and sure enough, it was from Samuel Beckett. So that's where I borrowed it from. And, Paul Saffa was said, failure is the foundation of innovation. Facebook mantra has been move fast and break things. So that's really the concept here. So it's this idea of consistently trying and at the same time writing a history about it. And that's why I wound up with the title, Fail Fast and Learn Faster, and then the subtitle, Lessons in Data-Driven Leadership in an Age of Disruption, Big Data Nation.
Wow.
Because I want to give it historical context, but I also want to show this is really about leadership and learning from experience and how you can succeed in the future.
Yeah. All right.
So how is the book organized? There's 10 chapters, and the way I think of this and describe it is that when I write an article's typically 1,000 to 1,500 words. And when they asked me to write a book, they said we were looking for about 60,000 words. I thought, like, okay, 1,500 words, 60,000 words, like, how am I going to tackle that? But when I thought about it, I thought, well, you break it down into themes. So I came up with 10 themes plus an introduction and conclusion. So now I'm doing the math. 60,000 divided by 12 is 5,000. Okay. And I'm saying, okay, I can write, 12 5,000-word articles. But then I also had the case studies that I wanted to put in, and the case studies take up about half the book. So that reduced it to basically 12 times 2,500. So I really had to write kind of 2,500 theses, if you will, supported by the case study articles. And that's how I basically attacked the book. And just by way of, because I don't think I mentioned in this particular deck, the publisher had asked me, I signed a contract in November of 2020, and the publisher said, can you get us a half manuscript by February 15th, 2021, and a full manuscript by May 15th, 2021, which basically would have been about a week ago.
Yeah.
And once I nailed the idea, I started writing over the holidays in the US, Thanksgiving into Christmas. And on January 4th, I sent them a draft of the completed manuscript well in advance. And they looked at it and they said, yeah, we'll accept it as is.
Oh, my.
We made some minor edits, but basically we accelerated the whole calendar 6 months. So originally, the book would have been published a year from the contract, which would have been November, the end of 2021, but we moved everything up to August as a consequence of that. So in terms of the organization of the book, I was able to ask my colleague, who's an advisor with our firm and a fellow with our firm, Tom Davenport, who's written 18 books, including the very well-received business bestseller, Competing on Analytics. So Tom wrote the foreword, and it's funny. It's a great foreword because when I shared it with some people, Jeffrey Moore, who who wrote Crossing the Chasm, said that the foreword alone was a masterpiece or a gem of its kind.
Definitely.
And then the introduction, then the 10 major themes, and I structured these into basically I wrote the book from the front and back forward into the middle. So I wrote the first chapter, then the 10th, then the second, then the 9th, then the 3rd, then the 8th, and the chapters that I wrote last were the 5th and the 6th. And some of the chapters are introductory and historic. Some of the chapters are deep dives into certain areas. And then some of the chapters I call interludes. So for example, a little history of big data really sets the stage and describes how data has evolved over the past 35 years to the point where it is today. Think Different then takes a sharp different tack, and that is, you really need to think different. You need to do things differently. It can't be the same old, same old. And so it really talks about what it means for organizations to become data-driven, and that's where I started injecting case studies. Then I take a little break, and I have this section called Insight and Knowledge, Data Science and Facts, and it just talks about data is used in different industries to gain insight, and there's a lot of COVID discussion in that section. And then every year conduct through my firm this annual survey called the Big Data and AI Executive Survey. Been doing it for a dozen years, since 2012. With roughly 85 Fortune 1000 companies that participate each year. It's kind of a who's who. It's from American Express and Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Fidelity Investments, JP Morgan, MasterCard, Eli Lilly, Merck, Pfizer, Bloomberg, McDonald's, Starbucks, Walmart, to name a few.
Wow.
So I take results from that survey and summarize them and present it in the context of the book and the major themes. So that's really the state of data in the corporate world today. So there's a lot of rich facts and figures from the survey. And then chapter 5 is maybe, that's my central theme in everything I talk about, the great challenge, and that's establishing a data culture. One of the takeaways from the survey was that when we asked executives, and by the way, the survey is of C executives from these organizations, so CEOs, Chief Data and Analytics Officers, CIOs. When we asked what was the biggest challenge, was it more related to technology or culture? 92% said it was related to culture. Organizational alignment, change management, evolution of business processes. So really focus on that as the feature point of the book, the great challenge around data culture. And then talk about the rise of the chief data officer. When did the first survey back in 2012, only roughly 12% of organizations had a chief data officer. In our most recent survey, it's close to 70%. So really talked about the evolution of this role, but not only why it's successful and important, but some of the struggles and challenges that organizations are facing in establishing this new role, which really changes how things are done, changes the C-suite structure. So as a consequence of that, it hasn't been all easy sledding. And then I take another interlude, and I talk about data responsibility, a word on data ethics. So those quotes that I read from previously in the Kathy O'Neill stuff, and all of the stuff from the critics of data come in here. So this is just to provide some perspective. So now everybody's been coasting along saying, oh, we're going to do all this cool stuff with data. Now they pause and say, there's issues of data ethics and we need to think about that. And then I try to put data in the larger context of historical disruptions and innovations. And that's the chapter, Data Disruption Innovation. I talk about innovators in a variety of industries and where data fits in there. And then the chapter, A Glimpse of the Future, Data-Driven AI. That's really talking about machine learning and AI with a number of case studies. So that's looking ahead to what companies are starting to do and will be doing over the next decade. And then I conclude with Data-Driven Leadership, One Company's Odyssey. And this is all about American Express's experience, because I've written 5 or 6 articles in American Express over the course of the past decade. So I really went back, looked at those articles, synthesized the material so you could see the progression through both trials and failures. American Express was very candid about their failures along the way, but they've
Awesome.
reached a very positive outcome. So it's a case study in one company who's a leader in the space.
Awesome. I think you've covered it very well, and we have one question that we can take, Randy, before you go ahead.
Sure, please.
Uh, yeah, it was around the book, cracking book from the research. Do you think there has been a change in thinking about data in corporations today, Mike Nash?
Yes, there's been a much greater embrace of data. You know, one of the things in our survey, roughly 97% of organizations are now investing in big data. They view data initiatives as important. So there is a full embrace of data initiatives. That doesn't mean that all organizations are as successful as they could be. Organizations are still working to get the most value out of the data they have. But we are in the data moment. You know, this is the information age, and this is the age of big data. And, you know, that's really why I wrote this book, because, you know, I over my career, I've been involved in a lot of trends early on. And, you know, I think of big data as, and this is one of the points of the book, in 2011, 2012, when the term started being used, it was really a little bit more of a trend. In other words, data was important, but some of the things that could be done with it weren't really being done en masse by the mainstream and large corporations. And today, data is firmly in the mainstream. So this is really the critical moment for data.
Awesome. I think definitely that answers Mike's question. I'll let you continue, Randy.
Yeah, just a few more slides here.
Yeah,
And then
please.
Answer a lot of questions. Just back one. So just go back one slide. Yeah. So how did you tell the story? As mentioned, develop the central themes and ideas, and then provide real world examples. So was a lot of great brands that was able to incorporate their case studies. So some of these include, as you can see, Allstate and American Express and Charles Schwab and Cigna and Amazon and JP Morgan Chase and MasterCard. And one of my favorite stories that I'll tell is the U.S. Department of Defense. So about 7 or 8 years ago, by chance, I was going through my college alumni magazine, and I saw that one of my former roommates, strangely enough, had just been appointed Assistant Secretary of Defense for Research and Development with something like a $30 trillion budget. And in the summary, it said that he was responsible for launching big data initiatives for the Department of Defense and the Pentagon. So it took me a while to figure out how to contact him, his email, because government emails are very complex. But in any event, I sent him an email, said, congratulations, and here's what I'm doing, actually around big data. And his response was, can you come to the Pentagon next week? I said, I suppose I can. I think I was a tourist once and saw the building from the outside, but I'll come down to Washington. So flew down to Washington and went to the Pentagon and went through all the layers of security where they confiscate everything that you have, your wedding ring, I believe, and went into a room, and there was about 18 participants, and it was unlike any audience that I'd ever been in front of before. There was about 6 generals in full stars and bars and military regalia. There was another 6 people in camouflage fatigues. And then there was another 6 that looked like Wall Street bankers, all in suit and ties. And I turned to my friend, the assistant secretary, and I said, who were the decision makers here? Because you just couldn't tell. But it was a very exciting discussion. And at one point they asked a lot about data preparation and how to get the usable data more faster. But along the way, they were mentioning campaigns. And having worked with the American Express and banks and consumer company, I was thinking in my mind like campaigns, like marketing campaigns. And then they actually said it was like military campaigns, and they needed the right data, and they needed all the data to, for example, decide when to make a drone strike. So, this was a different level of data application than I'd ever experienced before, but very exciting. So just to wrap up my presentation here with what are people saying about the book. So one of the things that did was, after having written the book and talking to the publisher, and the publisher says, well, now you need to market the book. Are there any folks that you know that could provide reviews of the material? And I basically grouped the people into several different categories. There were kind of old timers, if you will. So those were people that had written best-selling books over the years. There were people that were practitioners in the industry that held senior executive positions. And then there was basically the newcomers, so people that are internet and social media savvy. So I wanted to get a combination of these groups.
Wow.
So just I'll read a few of these quotes. David Edelman, who was chief marketing officer at Aetna and led McKinsey's digital marketing practice for many years. His response was inspiring, terrifying, should be required reading across C-suites and boards. Alison Segraves, who's chief data officer with a major bank and is one of the global data power women, said Randy Bean is the preeminent writer on the modern data revolution. Jeffrey Moore, who wrote Crossing the Chasm, one of the best-selling business books, said a wonderful hoard of business anecdotes. Big data is indeed crossing the chasm. And then finally, just wrapping up with a few more, Don Peppers and Martha Rogers, who wrote the bestseller, The One-to-One Future, back in the late 90s, called the book a whirlwind tour of real-world business cases.
Wow.
If you learn fast yourself, then start with this book. Cindy Housen, who everybody knows, is one of the thought leaders of the space. She said, fail fast, learn faster is both inspiring and cautionary. A must-read for CEOs, CDOs, and all data and analytics leaders. And then finally, Cam Carey said, lively explores how data has become an essential element of business strategy in the 21st century. And he's a fellow with the Brookings Institution, and actually his brother ran for the presidency of the United States in 2004, John Kerry.
Wow. Awesome. So where can we find the book? I would love to I have actually shared the link in the above the post, but also would love to let everyone know here you can find the book at failfastlearnfaster.org. Let me just, I'll just share the screen with everyone so everyone can have a look at it. Here it is. The website looks fantastic, Randy.
Oh, thank you. You can go to Amazon, and there's links from here to Amazon. Here you can see both a lot more blurbs and quotes, and you can actually see much larger descriptions. In other words, these are excerpts, but you can see the full descriptions. And one of the things that we're doing with the publisher is promoting pre-publication discounted sales, and we're doing that through our partner Porchlight Books, who's mentioned, I think, up at the top. And so, for example, we've gone to a number of Fortune 1000 companies as well as technology suppliers, and a number of them are buying large bulk copies of the book, from 100 to several thousand copies, so they can distribute to their employees, partners, customers, basically to get everybody on the same page in terms of understanding the value of data, the history and context of data, so that there's a synchronization and alignment around, here's the mission, here's our manifesto, and here's how we're going to use data to change our organization and change the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with that. So, Randy, we have a flood of questions. We'll take a few from the audience. There was a question from Carrie. First of all, thanks, Randy, for that overview. Amazing explanation about how you've started. You started writing and you've just come up with this masterpiece. So thanks for explaining. But now it's audience's turn where they can ask you some questions around the book. So Carrie Harrison here, she's asking if you had to give one point that you want people to take away from your book, what would that be?
That data is really important. It's what distinguishes us from people that lived in the dark ages and operated under superstition, and in a world that's very troubled today globally in so many ways. having and being guided by data, science, and facts not only is important, but it might be life-saving.
Yeah, awesome. And she also had a follow up when when she asked about if she can get the slide deck.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So, Carrie, you can definitely have the slide deck. You can reach out to Randy or me. I can help you with that. Also, we had an interesting question from Shruti. What was your favorite part to research and write about?
Actually, my favorite part of the book is the all the bad stuff because it's like a corrective against all of the like, oh, data is so cool and we have the best algorithm and we have, data management software that's going to allow us to get data to the hands of people faster. Because the section on the data ethics, I think that's really important, and everybody should keep in mind that data can be used for many positive things, but data can also be used for bad things if in the hands of people that want to put it to bad use. And also, data can be interpreted in so many different ways. You can have the same data, and people come to different conclusions. I mean, I see this in business all the time, where the data is put in front of all the executives, and you ask, what conclusions do you draw? And some people will say, our conclusion is we should get out of this market. And other people will say, our conclusion is that we should double down and go into this market. So people can interpret the data very differently. And also data can be presented very selectively. So back in the last presidential administration, this term came into vogue about alternative facts. There wasn't just one set of facts anymore. It was like everybody could present their own facts. So that's, dangerous. And the more that you have, the more that you're really looking at the data and there's agreement on what the data is telling you, hopefully people will have a consensus.
Right. I think, yes, definitely that answers for Shruti. And also we had an interesting question from Erica Clark. How fast is fast in working through the failure process? Very interesting question.
Well, Silicon Valley has really been founded on that mindset, and that's the Facebook quote about move fast and break things. So if you sit there, in data, I call it analysis paralysis. Go into a lot of organizations and people say, well, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and we could do it this way or we could do it that way. Action-oriented people, and the time that these other people are thinking about it, are doing something. They're putting out something and testing it in the marketplace to see how audiences respond. And you can do that so rapidly today with digital online channels and with high power computing. And so, I always said in my career that I always tried 9 things that failed for every one thing that was successful. But I acted quickly. So when things weren't successful, I pulled back and did correctives. And the people I worked for never really knew the difference anyways, because what they saw in the long run was the successes.
Right, that's so true. And those are golden nuggets, I guess, that you're sharing, Randy. Also, Erica did mention that she would also like to have the slide deck. I guess everyone wants the slide deck now, so yeah, definitely I'll be happy to provide them with that. So talking about a little more about what you touched base on was about in the book that you've mentioned is the cultural transformation. I would want to actually know a little about that, if Randy, we can do that before wrapping up the whole session. How is cultural transformation happening, and how have you actually conveyed it through the book?
Well, becoming data-driven represents a change for many organizations. That means that people have to do things differently, and it means their jobs change. People generally don't like change. They want to understand what's in it for them, what the benefit is. And if the benefit is positive, if it makes them more successful at their job, if it gives them more responsibility, that's a good thing. But people have to be shown and understand. They can't just be told, start doing things a certain way, and there'll be benefits. So any type of change around becoming data-driven has significant cultural implications. It also has organizational implications because new roles and responsibilities, the existence of the chief data officer means that those responsibilities have come away from other executives, such as the chief information officer, among others. And if executives in the CDO role aren't successful relatively quickly in showing value and showing benefit to the organization, they may have made enemies along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the ongoing challenges that we see day in and day out. Companies need to show the benefit to all their employees, all their stakeholders, in why they should be on board with data initiatives and cultural transformation.
Awesome. So that also brings me to an interesting question about the perspective of, how do you see as the future of the data profession? Like, where does it go, Randy?
I think it's the profession of the next generation, so the next 35 years or so. We're at our infancy. As mentioned, data continues to proliferate. Universities and schools can't do enough to train people to be skilled in data capabilities. The demand is only going to increase. So I'm confident that the next generation is going to be a time of high demand for people with data skills and capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree totally with that. So before we uh, end the session, there was a very sweet comment by Andrew Drinkwater. Appreciate the perspective on authoring a book by breaking it into meaningful components so that you are not writing the whole thing at deadline and no doubt infuriating your editor. Very much agreed, and that's one of my thoughts as well, coming from publisher background. What I feel is you have put your thoughts, and obviously you've enjoyed writing the book. I can totally see that, Randy. And someone in the comments, I don't know, I can't scroll down, there were floods of questions, but someone just asked that when are you write, okay, here it is. Matthew Emmerich asked, when will your next book be about? What will it be about?
Oh, well, that's very funny, because when the publisher first approached me, I said no. And then I called them back and I said, maybe. I said, well, can I write a memoir? And they said, a memoir? Absolutely not. But in a way, this is a memoir. It's a memoir of my business career and how I experienced the information revolution, the big data revolution. Next book, I don't know, maybe that will be Moby Dick.
Wow, awesome. So can't wait for that. But, definitely, personally, I would say one thing, and I know for the audience here as well, I have loved this session, Randy, and I never do that, but I wanted to do for this one. Can we again have you, because there were so many questions, there's so much curiosity. I know the book is getting published in the month of August. I guess 31st August is the date, if I'm not wrong, Randy.
That is correct.
Awesome. So can we have another session with you before 31st of August, before the publication, and we can decide, learn more about data and see how things kind of change? Maybe before the publication, we can have a session.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'll have to come up with a new presentation.
Awesome. We would love that. I'm sure about that. But it was fantastic talking to you, Randy. I wish you all the luck, and definitely we are meeting for a 2.0 version before the publication, before the book publishes. So looking forward to that. And thank you very much for joining in.
It was a pleasure being with you today, Ravit.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.